In late March 2026, Israel's parliament passed a law that expands the death penalty, but now as a default sentence. But in practice, it only applies to one group, Palestinians convicted of terrorism by Israeli military courts. The law creates a separate and harsher legal track, because Palestinians in the occupied territories are automatically tried in military instead of civilian courts. And almost immediately, the reaction was global, from the United Nations to European governments to regional powers like Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan. The message was the same. This law is racist, discriminatory, and violates international law. I'm Afzal Ahmed, and this is Aloud. This show brings you articles made for audio. In this episode, we've adapted the piece, New Death Penalty Law Shows How Israel Targets Palestinians with Highly Discriminatory Legal System, by Kazim Alam, published on TRT World on April 1st, 2026.
Order in the court!
To understand the controversy, you have to look at how justice works in the occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians are not tried in civilian courts, they are tried in military courts. Courts where conviction rates exceed 99%. That means in practice, a Palestinian accused under this law is almost certain to be convicted and sentenced to death. Legal experts say this creates two entirely different systems of justice, one for Israeli citizens, another for Palestinians. The law gives military courts no discretion. Military judges will be required to sentence Palestinians convicted of murder to death, except in special circumstances. There is no requirement for a unanimous decision. A simple majority will suffice. Yair Devir from the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem calls it a horrific example of the depths of apartheid. He argues that Israeli law consistently prioritizes Jewish citizens, while restricting Palestinian rights across land, movement, and political expression. Nasser Qadri, an international law scholar, also describes it as structurally unequal. Because the law doesn't just punish actions, it targets intent. Specifically, what it defines as intent to challenge the existence of the State of Israel. And that definition, he argues, can only realistically be applied to Palestinians. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who led the push for the legislation, declared that from today, every terrorist will know, and the whole world will know, that whoever takes a life, the State of Israel will take their life. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu voted in favor of the bill. Supporters argue the death penalty is a necessary deterrent because too many Palestinians convicted of terrorism by Israeli military courts have been released in past prisoner exchanges, only to return to violence and endanger Israeli civilians. The government insists the law targets specific acts of murderous terrorism, not ethnicity or identity. It applies through existing military courts that already handle security offenses in the occupied West Bank, where the threat of attacks remains acute. Officials reject accusations of apartheid or discrimination, saying the legal distinction reflects the different security realities and administrative frameworks for Israeli citizens versus those living under military administration in the occupied territories. They maintain this is the proportionate response to the ongoing threat from Palestinian resistance groups, and that the measure will save lives by making what they describe as would-be terrorists to think twice. But Israeli military officials and ministries have said the bill could breach international law and expose Israeli commanders, soldiers, and officials to arrest abroad. Critics say this law is not an isolated measure, but part of a much larger legal framework, a system that over decades has created different tiers of rights based on identity. Take the citizenship and entry into Israel law, often called the family unification ban. It prevents Palestinians from the occupied territories from living in Israel with their spouses, even if they are married to Israeli citizens. At the same time, any Jewish person from anywhere in the world can immigrate and gain citizenship immediately according to the law of return. Meanwhile, the same state denies Palestinians the right to immigrate or receive citizenship, even if they were born within Israel's UN-recognized borders. Then there's the Admissions Committees Law, which allows small communities to reject residents based on what they call social and cultural suitability. In practice, critics say this excludes Palestinian citizens from housing, institutionalizing segregation. And the Absentees Property Law, which Israel has used to take over most of the land in the country since 1950. Some laws go even further, shaping not just rights, but memory itself. The Nakba law penalizes institutions that commemorate the mass displacement of Palestinians in 1948, a moment when more than 750,000 people were forced from their homes. Experts say this law effectively suppresses historical narrative, restricting how Palestinians can remember their own past, and even for Israelis to make sense of its present. Other legislation targets daily life more directly. The Car Minutes law increases home demolitions, especially in Palestinian communities where building permits are rarely granted. And a 2023 law allows authorities to revoke residency or citizenship, almost exclusively affecting Palestinians. Together, these laws create what experts describe as a system of legal precarity, where one group's rights are conditional and another's are guaranteed. The new death penalty has triggered sharp international backlash. The United Nations warned that applying it in occupied territory could constitute a war crime. UN Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric called it cruel and discriminatory and urged Israel to rescind it. European countries including Germany, France, the UK, and Italy expressed deep concern, warning of its de facto discriminatory character. Across the Middle East, the response was equally strong. Turkey described the law as an attempt to entrench Israel's apartheid system. Egypt called it a serious violation of international law. Jordan condemned it in the harshest terms. And the Palestinian presidency issued a statement saying that the new Israeli law was a breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which guarantees protection for individuals and fair trial rights. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry also denounced the Israeli law as a dangerous shift towards legalizing genocide and adopting extrajudicial executions. Meanwhile, more than 9,300 Palestinians remain in Israeli prisons, including hundreds of children. Rights groups report widespread abuses, from torture to starvation to medical neglect, conditions that they say have already led to deaths in custody. In that context, the introduction of the death penalty raises even deeper concerns. Israel has used the death penalty only twice in its history. Once in 1948, when IDF Captain Meir Tobiansky, later exonerated, was executed by firing squad for alleged treason. And once in 1962 against Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. But this law would mark a dramatic shift, expanding its use, but this time applying it along ethnic and political lines. For critics, the issue is not just punishment, it's power. The power to define who is a threat, who gets a fair trial, and a legal system treating people differently based on who they are. That's all for this episode of Aloud, based on the piece New Death Penalty Law Shows How Israel Targets Palestinians with Highly Discriminatory Legal System, by Kazim Alam, published on TRT World on April 1st, 2026. I'm your host Afzal Ahmed. Thanks for listening.